Welcome back to the Weekend Show. You're now watching the lifestyle segment. Topic of discussion is racism in Africa. The killing of George Floyd, yet another innocent black man in America, has sparked protests across the world. In all 50 states of America, in the UK, France, Nigeria, and elsewhere. While it's easy to shun the topic of racism in America, how about we have a group of black girls in Nigeria that visited a Chinese restaurant in Lagos last year and were told they could not be served because they are black. We also had the instance of a Lebanese man who was trying to sell a Nigerian woman as a domestic servant on Facebook for 1,000 naira. We can see that there are clear instances of racism in Nigeria, and today that will be the focus of our discussion. So joining us to talk about this, we have
Pastor Andy Osakwe. He is a nationalist, a medical doctor by profession, and the senior pastor of Summit Church in Nigeria and outside, with branches in Nigeria and outside Nigeria. Also, we have Mathew Mensah. He's an actor and also the tourism ambassador for Ghana to South Africa. Welcome to the Weekend Show. I think we have Pastor Andy Osakwe on the line.
Good morning, Pastor Andy. Can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the honor. Thank you.
You're most welcome, sir. So as a black woman living on the African continent, race is one thing I am particularly thankful for, that I don't have to wake up every single day to think about. I don't have to think about the fact that I am a black woman waking up, going to work and striving for different opportunities. But in some instances, I've had to pinch myself to ask, is this really what's going on? I remember I went to a restaurant one time and the owner was saying, yeah, if a lot of black people come, the expatriates will stop coming to patronize services here. And I was saying, well, they're in Nigeria. They should want to mingle with their fellow Nigerians. So tell me, from your own experience, have you gone through or experienced any issue of racism on the African continent or in Nigeria in particular?
Well, I think that as Nigerians, I think that most likely most Nigerians have experienced some degree of racism, but it's not called racism, all right? Because what we call tribalism, for instance, is actually an extension of the concept of racism itself, all right? So where you have tribalism, then you also have racism. It's the same thing, all right? So if you have ever experienced tribalism based on maybe your ethnicity, the language you speak in Nigeria, then that's racism. So yes, I have.
Okay, so the reason why we're going to distinguish between tribalism and racism is because a lot of Nigerians don't think race or, the color of your skin is an issue in Africa. But from the studies we've carried out, it actually is. There are several types of discrimination against expatriate workers and Nigerian workers. And Andy, I believe, you have a follow-up question to that degree.
But being also a man of faith, Pastor Osakwe, in recent discussions, the church has been blamed and religion has been blamed as a tool which has been used to indoctrinate, brainwash, and enforce racism in different parts of the world, even in Africa. And this is because the Bible and religion preaches forgiveness, it preaches peace. And so people can't defend themselves or stand up for themselves. And so it's been said that the church has played a role and still plays a role in enforcing racism. What's your take on this, Pastor Osakwe?
Well, I don't agree with that. I know that you'll always have a few bad eggs. That doesn't make the whole institution itself to be at fault. The church, the message that we preach as Christians, for instance, and I know even the Muslims have a similar message. It's about peace. All right, we preach peace, and that's what Jesus. That was the centrality of the message of Jesus Christ. We were called peacemakers. Those who are peacemakers will be called the sons of God. So peace is central to our message, and I believe rather than being the cause of the problem, the church right now is meant to be the solution. And I believe faith in God when we have faith in God and we start to practice the tenets of our faith, it will help us bring unity in between our various ethnic groups, because in Christ we're all one, you see. And I believe that's meant to be the effect of our faith, unity.
Unity, most definitely. As a Christian, I do agree with you, but we've also studied history and we've seen that the Bible was used to propagate slavery back in the 1600s and for centuries beyond. I know in Ephesians 6 verse 5, the Bible states that servants be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ. So would you say that the Bible totally is against racism, or are there parts that we can pick and choose, or people can pick and choose to continue to enforce these stereotypes against minority groups?
No, I think it's about interpretation. Like, for instance, the verse of scripture that you read isn't dealing with slavery from the current day perception of slavery. That verse actually is a reference to employees and employers, right? So really, it wasn't about slavery in terms of looking at certain people as inferior and maltreating those people, all right? It was a question of those who were employees and those who were employers. And now the translation itself is where the problem is. So the Bible doesn't ever, right, especially in the New Covenant, there is no reference to any kind of distinction based on race. On the contrary, the scriptures let us know in the book of Acts that we're all of one blood. And you know, the very concept of racism is a misnomer, because we're all one race. If you actually follow the teaching of the scriptures, we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, without exception. So there can't be any other race except the human race, all right? So when we start to overemphasize maybe our little points of differences, like for instance, even the skin color, there's no truly white person or truly black person. We're all different shades in the color spectrum, determined by melanin concentration. So that doesn't make sense. I've never seen a white man, and I've never seen a black man. I'm looking at both of you, and I don't think I see that one of you is a bit darker than the other one, but there's no black one, there's no black person, and there's no white person. All right, so we've got to be careful not to overemphasize external points of difference, right, which are not fundamental.
That's quite interesting. Okay, the reason I want to dig deeper, because I want to see how it's ideal. You've painted an ideal picture. This is how the world should be. We shouldn't see, I don't want to say we shouldn't see color, because if we don't see color, then we can't necessarily dig into the issue of systemic racism, right? We won't be able to address it if we're not able to identify what the issues are. But that's an ideal world you live in. George Floyd, may God rest his soul, died because he was a black man, right? So you can't tell me that those officers were like, oh, he's neither black nor white, you know, he's just another human being. So color is still an issue, and it's even an issue here in Africa. That's huge. You know, when we see racism in Africa, we wonder, the most populous black continent in the entire world, people are still being discriminated against because of the color of their skin. So when do black people get a break? If you can't get a break in Africa, then where in the world can you get a break? You know, so I'm happy you've painted your perfect picture for us, but I wonder what can be done. What are some solutions that can be preferred to reduce the issue of racism in Africa? I know we have other issues like tribalism, violence against women, you know, a plethora of other issues. But what can be done? What are some solutions that can be done from your perspective?
Okay, first of all, we have to come to acknowledge that racism itself, the practice of racism, is based on a faulty mindset. Okay, once you start to think that anybody is inferior to you or even superior to you based on certain characteristics, right? Then there might be mostly external characteristics. Then what happens is that you create a distinction. You create a class distinction between people, all right? And if we don't change the way we think, then we can't fix the problem. The thinking must change first before we start to address the actions, okay? And that's why dialogue is important. We need to have discussions. We need to have honest conversations about our commonalities. We are a lot more. We have a lot more in common than we have things that are different between us. Okay, so we need to start to have those discussions. Why do you dislike me because of the color of my skin? Why should you dislike me? What is it about the color of my skin that threatens you? You understand? And if someone who feels threatened by the color of another person's skin would sit down the same table with that person and have those discussions, we'll find out we're all humans. And that's why I brought the ideal situation. The ideal situation should be our standard when it comes to approaching these issues. We should recognize we're all the same. We're all the same. And once we start to see ourselves as different, then we'll start to create opportunity for racial distinction and racial, skirmishes. So we're all the same. We're all the same, okay? And something that is very important is the fear of God. Okay? If we cultivate the fear of God, right, and respect for God's creation, I look at both of you, and the first thing I see God's creation, right? So I fear God, and because I fear God, I respect the fact that He has created you, both of you, okay? So I respect you. I respect you because I respect God. Very important, right? And then there's something that I really find that I think some people might find this difficult to swallow, but I really believe that we should encourage as much as possible interracial marriage. Intermarriage, yes, we should, because one of the problems we have is as long as we're trying to defend our own group of people, right, and protect them and isolate them, then we propagate this whole racist, ideology. But when we allow, for instance, we allow people to encourage people to get married, to intermarry, right, based on interpersonal compatibility, remove all the factors, remove the color factor, remove the language factor, remove the ethnic factors, and let people get to the point where you marry someone simply because you like the person and you feel you're compatible with the person. After some generations, there will be a neutralization of these racial, strong points. They will disappear. Imagine whites and blacks, right, intermarried. After a while, all their children are mixed, or most of the children are mixed, and you don't have as much. You don't have that strong protectionism that takes place. We're white, we're black. That's part of the problem.
Pastor Andy Osakwe, thank you so much. I think you've definitely brought a different perspective into this conversation. As a matter of fact, your solution is what some studies have shown would be implemented in the next 20, 30 years. The majority of the population would actually be mixed race in the next few decades. So thank you so much for sharing your optimistic view on this issue with us, and we hope to have you on the program at another time. Thank you so much for joining us.
God bless you. Thank you.
God bless you too. Thank you so much. So coming up next, we have Mathew Mensah.
Yes, we do. Mathew Mensah is calling on Skype. Do we have Mathew on the line? Okay. Okay, we have Reno Omokri. Reno is an author and activist, and he's also been in the political space in Nigeria. Hello, Reno.
Hello, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thanks. Oh, thank you.
Welcome to the program. We should call you Pastor Reno, correct?
Well, just call me Reno. I'm an ordained pastor, but people call me Reno. My congregation calls me Pastor Reno. You don't have to.
Okay, Reno. So I read your op-ed, George Floyd, the Black Race and the Greatest Love of All. You clearly stated that in Africa, many of our well-known comedians have made tasteless jokes about dark-skinned blacks like Lupita Nyong'o. In America, black sororities and fraternities reject fellow blacks if they can't pass the brown paper bag test. So how do blacks play a role in promoting racism on the African continent?
I'll give you a very good example. Let's talk about Nigeria. Nigeria treats Nigerians far worse than America treats African Americans. A governor, a sitting governor, Nasir El-Rufai, the governor of Kaduna State, had sent me an email in which he referred to southern Nigerian women as whores. This is I mean, Nasir El-Rufai. So now, how do you expect such a person to promote racial coexistence or tribal coexistence? His own son, one of his sons, Bello El-Rufai, was publicly called, libeled people of an ethnic group, called an Igbo woman a whore, threatened to pass an Igbo man's mother to his friends to be gang raped. And then when he was called out, you know, his mother was asked to intervene, and she said all is fair in love and war. She later apologized. Another of El-Rufai's son, Bashir.
Sorry, Reno, can we talk about this in relation to racism? We understand the role of tribalism and ethnicity, but for the purpose of this and because of how much of a pressing issue this is, we understand the local sentiments, but we're still affected by this. But just to refocus on your response, let's talk about racism, as Osasu has spoken, in Africa and how it affects us.
Okay, now you need to understand, in Africa, we are one race. So you can't talk about racism in Africa. That is a contradiction. So what you have to talk about in Africa, you have to talk about issues of tribalism. Sub-Saharan Africa is one race. I'm a well-traveled person. Last year I was in 37 countries. So if you're talking about Africa, you're going to be talking about tribalism, not racism.
Okay. Reno, sorry, let me give you an example. In Nigeria, you have certain organizations where foreigners, whites, are paid more than the blacks, more than Nigerians. You have certain organizations, and in government, you have worked in government, where an international company where white people, and this is not being racist, come to Nigeria and they are given priority when it comes to contracts, when it comes to doing certain jobs, when we have some of the most intelligent and qualified people here in Nigeria and Africa. And so even in our country, we see foreigners, white people, being treated differently from black people, and also how those foreigners treat their Nigerian staff as a result of our color. So this actually exists. So will you say this isn't a problem in Nigeria?
Well, that's not racism. What you're talking about, that's not racism. There is some racism on that level, but it's hardly with white. It's more with people of Middle Eastern descent and then Asian descent, how they treat their staff in Nigeria. Where while I was presidential spokesman, we had reports on that. But when you're talking about organizations like, for instance, Shell, I'll give you an example. Shell, they actually take people of Nigerian citizenship to other African countries, and then they pay them higher because those people are expatriates. So in any country in the world, when you bring in expatriates, you pay them higher than the local population. That's not racism. It's standard corporate practice. You know, I'll give you a very good example. You know, I have a friend, while he was in Nigeria, he was his colleagues in Total, they were being paid more than him. But then there was a vacancy in another country, actually in France, and then he was taken to France. He was paid at par, and then from France he was taken to, I think, another country, and he was paid as an expatriate. So that's the issue in Nigeria, and we had a report on this when I was a presidential spokesman. Is there are a lot of people, mostly Asian origin and Middle Eastern origin, who own manufacturing firms in parts of Nigeria that do not treat their local staff well. And you know that's more of an issue of labor laws. But on a scale that you're trying to talk about, you know, racism, it's not that it's not that widespread in Nigeria, at least.
Reno, I would actually beg to differ. We saw the case of a group of Nigerian young girls who went to a Chinese restaurant in Lagos and were told they couldn't be served because they are black, that the restaurant was not for black people. We saw the issue of the Lebanese man that was trying to sell a Nigerian woman on Facebook for 1,000 naira as a domestic worker to his people in Lebanon. We saw the same issue of people actually going out of their way, you know, to serve or to please the people of lighter you know, skin color than the black people. So we've seen issues like this numerous times, but it's more of, I feel like our national issue or our continental issue sort of surpasses that of the race issue. In South Africa, for instance, what's the name of the political leader now of the opposing party? He would tell you that whites are still owning more land than, you know, the black race. So it's an issue on the continent.
I believe you're talking about Malema.
Malema, yes, thank you so much, Julius Malema, yes. So it's an issue on the continent, but I do agree with you that tribalism, poverty, economic, you know, equality also plays more of an issue in Nigeria. But sticking to the issue of racism, what do you think some solutions are? You worked in government. You also know, you know, some of the internal processes we can put in place to curb this once and for all. So what is your solution to this issue?
But that's what I was trying to talk about first, and then you guys interjected. You need to understand, in psychology, there is a principle called mirroring. And then your viewers might want to Google that. It's a popular psychological principle. What happens in mirroring is that people tend to treat you how you treat yourself. So when we have a president, for instance, who says that those who gave me 5% of the vote cannot be treated in like those who gave me 97% of the vote, you are mirroring how you want other people to treat your people. So when you have a governor saying the kinds of things that he said about Southern women, you're mirroring how you want people to treat your own people. When you have a president who goes in front of the world in the Commonwealth in the United Kingdom and says that Nigerian youths are lazy, you're mirroring how you want people to treat your own people. So we have to treat ourselves well. And then when people, I'll give you a very good example. If you go to your neighbor, for instance, and say, you know what, my sisters, they're all trash. My sisters, they're all whores. I mean, nobody in that community is going to treat your sisters well. It starts from you. So we have to mirror how we want the world to treat us. If we treat ourselves well, I'll give you a very good example. You know, this is my Freelia Sharibu hashtag. I've been traveling the world. I met with Boris Johnson. That's a picture of Boris Johnson wearing the Freelia Sharibu shirt. I met with several world leaders. When I was traveling in Africa, I had to get a visa for African countries. My US citizen staff, my personal assistant, who's an American citizen, did not need visas. So now you think about that. We have institutional racism against ourselves, whereby Africans, I needed a visa to go to South Africa, to go to Zimbabwe, to go to Zambia. But an American, my own staff, my personal assistant who's an American or white American, did not need a visa. Now you think about that. In Europe, they love themselves. There's visa-free continental travel in Europe. In America, they love themselves. In Africa, do we love themselves? Do we love ourselves? These are the issues that I'm talking about. Look at xenophobia in South Africa. What was happening? They weren't looting and burning and killing white folk. They were looting the property of black folk like them. They call them makwere. That's how they call them. Because obviously, I'm sure you know, I'm also an anthropologist. I visited South Africa. There's a lot of hatred for Nigerians, because the issue is that Nigerians, anywhere we go, when we leave the country, we tend to be very successful. So we have to mirror how we treat ourselves. We have to show other races how we treat ourselves. I mean, Osasu, I know you've lived in America. You know, I live in California. I also have a home in the UK. I mean, you will agree with me, when an African immigrant comes to America, it's easier for you to blend with white folks than to blend with African Americans. African Americans generally don't like African immigrants. Same with Caribbean blacks. Now, and people like me, a lot of people like Ben Moribus, we've been trying to build a love, brotherhood among the African race, but it has to start from the top.
Reno, you made a very integral point. Mirroring, it's a complete, I believe it's a holistic solution for this issue. The way we treat ourselves is so important. The way you treat your family in your own household is the way other people will treat your family members. So that's actually quite a solution that I believe most of our viewers can take away from this conversation. Do you have any final words?
Well, I mean, again, it goes to mirroring. If Africa is going to be destroyed, Africa is going to be destroyed by two things: tribalism and religious persecution. You know, I did mention Nasir El-Rufai. I mean, if you remember when we had Boko Haram, Nasir El-Rufai went to Port Coley's house in the United Kingdom and accused Christians of being behind Boko Haram. You know, we have it on camera, we have it on video, accused Christians of being sponsoring Boko Haram. He later said it on Twitter. Now, when you have leaders like Muhammadu Buhari and Nasir El-Rufai fanning the embers of tribalism and religious tensions, you're not going to have people in America wanting to treat you better. As a matter of fact, Nigerians are treated better than the American government, than our government treats us. In America, 77% of black doctors in America are Nigerians. And yet we are only 0.1% of the population. In Nigeria, we have right now a government that is so, look at what, this is the first time in the history of Nigeria whereby we've had a northern Muslim as the head of the executive, a northern Muslim as the head of the judiciary, and a northern Muslim as the head of the legislature, the three arms of government. Look at the security and armed services. They are being headed by northern Muslim males. So where's the balance? How can you say that you want balance in America when in Nigeria, the biggest black country, there is no balance? Right. Chief of Army Staff, EFCC, NSA, DMI, NIS, NPS, Custom, all of them headed by northern Muslim males. I know I'm making you jittery. I know that you're jittery about NBC, but I need to say this. These are the facts.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Let's not digress too much from the issue of racism. We hope you will exceed when next we call on you. We have another person on the line, Mathew Mensah. Are you there?
You know, okay, so while we get Mathew on the line, it's quite interesting hearing views of people interviewing, because on the one hand we talk about a unified Nigeria and say ourselves as one, but when it comes to talking about the issues, we now say XYZ from the north, XYZ from the south. So it now becomes also problematic. Yes, this may be an issue, but if we say ourselves as one, how do we now make this separation? Mathew Mensah, he's an actor. He is the tourism ambassador for Ghana to South Africa. He's also been in a lot of Nollywood movies. Welcome to the Weekend Show, Mathew.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, let me just say, just to clear it up, I mean, I'm not an actor. It's not yet. But yes, I'm the ambassador for tourism, arts and culture for Ghana to South Africa, and of course as well across the continent. And I'm also a humanitarian working with campaigns across Africa, especially on children issues, gender-based violence, and working on racism now as well.
Okay, so Mathew, we're just going to take a short break so we can fix your camera. So we'll take a short break right now. We'll be back on the Weekend Show. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the program. Mathew, can you hear us? Okay, so we're talking about the issue of racism in Africa. You've traversed the entire continent. You've worked in Ghana, in South Africa. You've had many interactions with Africans of different races and tribes. What has been your own conclusion on the issue of racism in Africa? Is it a topic worth discussion? And if so, how have these other African countries been able to curtail this menace?
Well, I think that racism is definitely a topic on the continent. And I think racism plays out in many different ways. I mean, first of all, we all see that we have a lot of problems as well, like not just here in West Africa with tribalism, which is also a form of racism, of course, you know, that you don't accept someone because they come from a different tribe. And of course, we all know the issues that's been throughout decades in South Africa, you know, where people even within their own continent couldn't even live a decent life just because they were black, you know, in Africa, you know. So of course we have had racism a lot, you know, and there's different forms of racism, and sadly we haven't really done anything about it. And I think as well, like one of the key things as well that we have to realize is that now that racism is such a big topic on the world platform, we can't really expect people like the white people to love us if we don't love ourselves, you know, and that is the key thing. You know, there's a lot of self-hatred, you know, here on the continent, you know, and I experience it like in different ways. I mean, my dad is black, my mom is white, So I've seen and I've grown up with and experienced like from different angles, so yes, racism is definitely on here on the continent.
Mathew, it's good that you acknowledge the fact that racism is an issue here on the continent. I see you being African, you're light-skinned. That's what we like to call it here. And we've seen it, well, let's say it how we like to call it here. So we'll say, oh, you're light-skinned, you're dark-skinned. You've seen in different industries, in modeling and entertainment, where people will say, oh, a lighter-skinned girl was picked over a darker-skinned person. You see blacks who are featured on ads and they're airbrushed to look lighter than they are. For you as a person, have you experienced discrimination or privileges as a result of the color of your skin?
You know what? I have to be definitely honest with you. I've lived in quite a few countries across the continent. Now, of course, I'm living back home in Ghana, but I lived in Nigeria. I lived probably the most years on the continent. I've lived in Nigeria, about 8 years. Grew up in Nigeria. I lived in South Africa, and I would say that I kind of felt it more in Nigeria, because it was almost reversed set of regarding this whole thing with privileges. I feel that people would in some areas treat you different because they saw you as being a lot of people just say like straight, oh, they'll think that you're Igbo and from Europe and so on like that, and then they'll just be treating you in a different way, which was kind of confusing for me in the beginning, and that's some of those kind of colonial hangovers I felt, that was very rampant in Nigeria at that time, especially in the areas that I was, where you just felt that people would speak to you in a different way, and I was very uncomfortable with it, because the things that I was doing in Nigeria, especially working with orphanages and so on like that, I didn't want it to be treated differently. On the reverse, I actually was trying to mix as much as I could with the local community,
So how have you been able to use your privilege in combating this issue of racism? As you clearly stated that lighter skin, whiter people are giving more privileges than those of us who are darker. So how have you been able to use your privilege? You're very well educated on the topic. As I said, you've been able to travel to different African countries. You've spoken about your experience here in Nigeria. So how have you been able to use your platform and your education to not only enlighten, but to curtail this issue?
Well, first of all, I think, me personally, I always, because, the thing is, well, like a lot of times, people think that it's better on the other side, and for me, it's never. People that all my friends that know that I grew up with is that I've always been much more attracted to dark-skinned women. I don't date like the light-skinned women. I've always been dating dark-skinned women because I feel that black women are the most beautiful women you ever come across, and at the same time as well, I have a shelter. I have an orphanage for 35 young girls from all over Africa, that is in South Africa. And one of the things that is important for me to teach them is that they have to be proud over their skin color, and that should not be a hindrance for them anywhere or for anything they wanted to achieve in life. And you can only be that by being proud of how you look, and especially with this whole crazy trend regarding women bleaching their skin, which is something that I've been advocating a lot, which is something that I feel that we don't pay enough attention on, and in fact we are actually promoting it by giving young women better opportunities because they have bleached their skin. Suddenly you see them doing more roles in acting, etc. And that's the things we should really clamp down on. I think it's a very terrible thing, because how can you be on the continent and then it should be at any given time be seen as a better thing for you to be light when the continent is created by dark-skinned people. You know, this is foundation of this beautiful continent of ours. You know, so I think that, you know, there's a lot of things we can do, but it's also about each of us standing up, and also just like in your own circles, you know, your own social circles. You know, I mean, I remember as well when growing up, and even when I was in London, and some of my friends who were all like my Nigerian friends, Ghanaian friends, etc., and they were all much darker than me, and they were always, sometimes they'll be teasing me, to asking me, why am I so interested in dark girls? You know, why would I not want any of these light-skinned girls to have as a girlfriend? And I was like, but why is it that you don't even respect the same tone of color that you are yourself? You know, why would someone be better? You know, and that is the kind of form of self-hatred that I feel that we need to look into, you know, to change this whole narrative of racism. Because, as I said to start with, it's difficult to get white people to expect them to love us if we don't love ourselves, you know. So to think that someone, even here on the continent, that you should be fighting racism is just, for me, it's just crazy, you know. I don't think anyone should have any more privilege or rights, you know. And if you do, it's up to you to stand up and change that, you know, yourself, you know. For me, I work all over the continent, you know, and if people should treat me differently, like, you know, some of the places I go to because of my color, I'll be in big trouble, because I've done peace campaigns in Liberia and Sierra Leone, and it was Nigerian peace soldiers that was keeping me safe. You know, if they were not seeing as, oh, they wanted to do their job because people were looking different, I mean, we would not have peace in places like that, you know. So you have to respect people for whatever color they are, you know, and look at what they deliver, what they bring to society as a whole, you know.
Yes, Mathew, that's a fine place to leave it. I think you properly encapsulated the entire issue, and you know, the key takeaway from these conversations for me personally is the way we treat ourselves is so important. When you see someone of a lighter skin color, or a white person or an Asian person getting more privilege than you, it's a reflection of the way you have treated your fellow black. So I think for everyone who's watching, we need to start to make a conscious decision to treat ourselves better, treat your staff better, treat your maids better, treat, you know, when you're hiring, and sure you're not paying the expat or the white person more than you're paying the black person. I mean, these are simple decisions that we can make a conscious effort, you know, to enact in our society.
I agree, and there's the role of policy making, and so like in the EU and in the UK, they have certain policies which says you need to employ locals first if they are qualified, and so we have local content laws here, but we need to enforce it and say, listen, if you have somebody who is Nigerian capable for it, employ them first, because we already have a high rate of unemployment regardless.
And if there are local services also where we realize that there's discrimination against people because of their races, then businesses like that should be shut down. And I'm happy that Chinese restaurant we spoke about was shut down by the government, but we need to do a follow-up also to see what
if they came back 2 weeks later and they have the same practices.
Mathew, any final words before we let you go?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would just like to say that, you know, it's so important. I'm so happy that you're having this conversation. I mean, I know you guys always have some of the most amazing topics. I know you are dealing with gender-based violence as well, which is also another very important topic. But one of my final words was that, yes, Black Lives Matters, but also our culture. You know, sometimes as well, people would a little bit scoff their nose if you wanted to order, like, you know, your African food or wearing, you know, African attire. You know, and we have to be more proud of ourselves as Africans, because that is one of the things that would make us feel more proud as well to be black, you know.
Yes, most definitely. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and we'll definitely have you on the program at another time.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Take care. We'll take a short break right now. When we return, more on The Weekend Show. Don't go anywhere.